Welcome to the webinar, Reality Check, What Sustainability Means for Your Business. Throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on your screen. Time permitting, we will answer all of the questions that we can. If your question does not get answered, please do not hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com and we will respond. Thank you and enjoy today's webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Kristin Marshall, and I'm an analyst here at Lux. I'll be leading today's webinar on the buzzy topic of sustainability and what it means for your business. But I wanted to start today's webinar a little bit different. I wanted to start today by talking about my personal reality check with sustainability and my love-hate relationship with running. So I'm a runner. If you don't believe me, this is me just before running the Boston Marathon in 2011. Being from Boston, this was one of the proudest days of my life. But on that day, I also had my first realization of how much of an impact running could have on the environment, from the amount of waste generated by the runners tossing their water cups and goo packs onto the road, to the carbon footprint of all of the athletes traveling to the event. As a concerned citizen who wasn't ready to give up on running, I wondered how I could do better. And I'm not alone. Runners or other concerned citizens like myself and our willingness to vote with our wallets is one of the reasons why brands like Nike and Adidas are focusing a great deal of innovation effort around sustainability, from sourcing lower impact materials to go into shoes and apparel, to ensuring a better end of life for these products and packaging. They make consumers happy, they make a profit doing so, everybody wins. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Wrong. And I'm sure you already knew that, or else you wouldn't have joined this webinar today. So for example, Nike's corporate responsibility and sustainability strategy dates back to the 1990s, when the company faced widespread public criticism over labor practices in contract factories. In response, Nike developed a corporate responsibility division that has focused on improving factory working conditions, reducing the environmental footprint of its manufacturing, including its recent Move to Zero campaign or its journey to zero carbon and zero waste, and really mitigating the threats of its supply chain posed by climate change. By making sustainability integral to its innovation efforts, Nike has considerably improved its supply chain over many years, like minimizing its dependence on water by incorporating lower impact materials like organic cotton. And it really has made several product breakthroughs, like its Fly Knit sneakers in 2012. Yet, despite all of these huge wins for Nike, the company as a whole is still facing some backlash for not doing enough in the name of sustainability. Some critics claim that although Nike has made few positive changes to its environmental practices, it still has a way to go before it truly can be considered a sustainable brand. In terms of its new Move to Zero campaign, for example, some have called it a marketing campaign that replaces or that repackages old commitments without offering new ones. So this is a case of a company that has taken considerable steps to do better over the past 30 years, but is still falling short in the eyes of quick to criticize consumers and watchdog groups and getting picked apart in the media. They say the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So why even bother with sustainability in the first place? So one of the things we do here at Lux is to try and answer the why, the how, and the what of sustainability for our clients and their organizations. Why is sustainability still worthwhile for companies to pursue, despite the risks and challenges? Why are companies even running this race in the first place? How should companies identify and go about achieving opportunities in sustainability to best position themselves for success? And then what types of technologies will move the needle? And what types of solutions will help get organizations across the finish line in achieving their sustainability goals, while at the same time helping them to avoid backlash? It's really important to note that the answers to these questions are complex and can differ depending on what your industry you're in and where you sit along the value chain. So at Lux, we have analysts across the organization working together to help our clients not only shed light on these differences, but also in uncovering these universal principles that all companies should follow and adopt when forming an innovation strategy around sustainability, no matter what stage of their sustainability journeys. So we recognize that for many companies around the world, the value proposition of sustainability is unclear. And so for today's webinar, I will be inviting my colleague, Samitha Dupa, the VP of our product operations, to have a conversation specifically on the why of sustainability. As a consultant, Samitha has worked with a number of clients across a wide range of industries in achieving their sustainability goals. So after the webinar, if you're interested in learning more about the how and the what of sustainability, please reach out. My colleagues and I would be more than happy to have a conversation. But for the time being, welcome Samitha to the digital stage to talk about the why of sustainability.
Thanks, Kristin.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to dive right in here, actually, and I'm going to ask, is it actually possible for companies to truly be sustainable or benefit from sustainability, given that growth and sustainability seem to be really fundamentally opposed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to answer that question, we need to start one step back, which is to answer the question, what is sustainability? It's this big word that, as you just referred to a few slides ago, is very hyped at the moment and has gone through its own hype cycles. But if we can set a definition as the premise for the rest of our discussion, I'd like to assert that sustainability is really about the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. If you look at the totality of sustainability, that's what it is. The problem, as you rightly pointed out, is that most industries were set up under this mythical premise that resources were infinite, and that set a really terrible baseline over the years. So practically speaking, in today's day and age, sustainable, the way that we use it, actually just means more sustainable than this awful baseline that we've already set. So better. And it can certainly be misleading. I think Nike and others have faced a lot of backlash resulting from that confusion. But the most important thing for companies to do is to prioritize more sustainable as a goal, but for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. So what are these right reasons then? If being truly sustainable is futile, why should companies pursue it at all?
There's three main reasons that companies should pursue sustainability, even if it's not 100% sustainable, or if it's even possible to be 100% sustainable. The first, and probably the most important, is to make money. And when I'm saying make money, I mean both the top line and also the bottom line for the company. The second is to mitigate long-term supply chain risk. And then the third is enduring customer loyalty, making sure that you have that long-term customer loyalty.
Okay, so those seem really compelling. And I think what I'd like to do is dive maybe a bit more into the first. So how companies are making money off of sustainability. Do you have a good or a favorite example or a case study that you could share here?
There are so many. And honestly, I think in the last 10 years of our consulting business, some 50-60% of projects that we've worked on has somehow emerged from this idea of being more sustainable, impacting the bottom line. But here's one good example that I really like. So a lot of consumer-facing industries are losing a lot of money through operational inefficiencies and waste. This has constantly been a problem that's only getting worse. But by tackling these problems, companies can not only reduce waste, but then they can also have an outsized impact on their bottom lines. A great example of this is a company called Lagunitas Brewing, which is a microbrewing craft beer company who was growing to a point where the local municipality in California could no longer handle the 7 liters wastewater produced for every 1 liter of beer that they were producing coming from that plant. So instead of figuring out ways to truck, hundreds and thousands of gallons of this wastewater hundreds of miles away to a wastewater facility that was big enough, Lagunitas instead installed a wastewater treatment system on site from a company called Cambrian Innovations. This is a company that we ourselves follow at Lux Research. And this company's technology uses microbes that essentially eat the organic waste in the wastewater, and then they produce biogas as a byproduct. That biogas can then power small turbines to help power the brewery. So not only is the wastewater being treated, you also get some power on the side. So all in all, the estimates are that this is going to save the company something like $25 million over the lifetime of that one brewery.
Wow. That's not an insignificant line on any facility's balance sheet. So does this tech concept work in other industries? I can imagine that, well, I already kind of understand that the answer is yes here.
Yes, for sure. You can think of any industry that might have organic waste streams, right? Like winemaking,
Right.
pharmaceuticals, even textiles that use things like enzymes to treat different types of textiles that are in production.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, that makes sense. Very water intensive industries. Okay, so you also had mentioned that companies can also target top line growth as well. So what do you mean by this exactly?
Right. So obviously, most consumer-facing industries are constantly pressured by shareholders for growth. That's just
Mhm.
a nature of the business. But that can't all come from operational efficiencies. At some point, that's diminishing returns.
Right.
You need new products. You need new ideas, things that are going to excite the consumer base and excite your shareholders. So here, companies can really aim to solve consumer problems and solve sustainability challenges by creating new categories.
Mhm.
A great example of this is plant-based milks. The 270 million dairy cattle in the world contribute a lot to GHG emissions, and I'm sure we've all seen articles about all the issues that come with cattle, which include things like contaminated groundwater, deforestation so that the cattle can graze, a huge water footprint. And then on the consumer side, because we're consuming so much more dairy nowadays, we see a rise in milk allergies. We see a rise in things like lactose intolerance and cholesterol related heart problems amongst people that are consuming dairy. So companies like Oatly have done a great job in educating consumers and businesses, and they created this whole exciting movement around a product that addresses both the nutrition and sustainability while arguably managing to taste good. I personally really like the chocolate oat milk. I think it's delicious. But led largely by Oatly, the oat milk industry alone, saw growth of 180% year over year growth just last year in the US, according to Nielsen IQ.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because, oftentimes when I talk to clients, I say that sustainability alone is often not a value proposition or enough of a value proposition. And so when you target these other bigger trends, right, and then, you can use those to kind of integrate your sustainability agendas, it not only helps you as a company appear more sustainable, but also it helps with that top line growth. I think customization is one of the mega trends that I've seen that you know companies can pursue, but also can use to incorporate some of their sustainability goals, or can use to achieve some of their sustainability goals. Um, so we talked a bit about ways that sustainability can impact growth, but can you comment on some of the other more strategic reasons to target more sustainable ideas?
Right. So there are a lot of other issues that are all around us, right? Things like climate change, things like geopolitics. And in addition to being generally important for society, from a company's point of view, these can lead to things like material scarcity, which is a huge problem. We've already seen early indications of this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where supply chains were hugely disrupted because some raw material was coming from on the other side of the planet and it couldn't get to where it needed to be for manufacturing. So diversifying supply chains can mitigate some of this risk and give companies options in the long term, lest something like this happen again. So a good example of this is in athletic footwear. A lot of shoes, as you can imagine, often use leather, which again has a lot of the same issues as dairy because, again, they're made from cows. Plus, materials from a single shoe could zigzag across the world 7 to 10 times before reaching the actual final customer, which creates an outsized environmental impact, and that's not sustainable. So one alternative that's recently been emerging is fungus derived leather or mycelium derived leather. There's several companies that are developing this, but one in particular, Ecovative Design, has one of the more promising technologies. And they are using a combination of agricultural waste, mushroom tissue, and fermentation to create these mushroom-based leathers. And by using these as raw materials instead of growing a whole cow just for its hide, you effectively circumvent the entire lifetime cost and footprint of that cow, and open up possibilities for local or even hyper-local production of that raw material, which can definitely be more sustainable when the technology is scaled up.
Yeah, I really like that you give that example of the possibility of local production, potentially even more distributed production to mitigate risk. Because although I'd argue that a lot of bio-based materials still have the same end of life issues as petrochemical ones, and it's really important to consider how the raw materials are being sourced, because in itself could have sustainability or negative sustainability impacts. These materials do really have the potential to open up new upstream options for companies, and combined with novel bioindustrial processes, they really do have that potential for distributed production, and it could really mitigate some of that supply chain risk from things like climate change. So it's a really interesting example. So we talked about making money, and we talked about how to mitigate some potential long-term supply chain risk. But what about the most important stakeholder for brands, the consumer? How do they fit into this picture?
Yeah, enduring customer loyalty is kind of the holy grail for consumer brands. We see that a lot of companies engaging in greenwashing to acquire customers. They're afraid of over communicating that they've only made 5% progress, and then there's backlash. But the problem is, with the widespread availability of information nowadays, it's only a matter of time until the company eventually faces that backlash. Instead, if a company were to approach sustainability in earnest with full transparency about how far they've gotten and what the path is forward, customer loyalty naturally follows. One of my favorite examples of this is Patagonia. I mean, in a conversation about sustainable brands, it's impossible to skip Patagonia. One of the many examples of how this company has enduring customer loyalty is that about 2 years ago, Patagonia started offering vouchers to its customers to send back garments with any kind of tear or broken zipper or what have you. The pre-owned item would then go through their team, who would repair those items and then sell them as pre-owned items on a platform. And Patagonia actually made, on average, like $100 per item that was sold on that platform. And then, obviously the vouchers came out of that. If you've spoken with any Patagonia customers ever, or if you are a Patagonia customer, you'll notice that on the whole, they're very, very reluctant to buy their gear from anywhere else. I have friends who've been buying from them for years, and they refuse to look at another brand. And it's not necessarily because the performance is so, obviously different from all the other brands out there. It's because of things like this. The company is genuinely about something bigger, and they're very transparent and communicate well with their consumers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I myself as a Patagonia, coming from California, I'm a huge Patagonia fan. So yeah, I can completely relate with that example. So thank you, Samantha. You've really helped in giving us a better understanding of the why companies should be thinking about sustainability today. Not because it's the right thing to do. There are very clear opportunities to make money, shore up for the future security of supply chains, and really drive the long-term customer loyalty when doing sustainability right. So, in terms of our overall outlook, it is important to join the race, and not just because it's the right thing to do here, because there really are opportunities when pursuing sustainability. But I can't end today's webinar without saying something also about the how and the what. Again, how should companies identify and go about achieving opportunities in sustainability to best position themselves for success? And the what types of technologies and strategies are most likely to push the needle with the minimal potential for backlash. So very quickly, I think one of the most important aspects to consider with the how is that you shouldn't really go at sustainability alone. Collaboration is key when setting goals, establishing credibility, and also avoiding pitfalls. So this is important both within one's own organization, especially when you talk about things like collecting data and reporting, which is becoming really much more important for shareholders, but also externally when you think about, potential collaborations that could, with potentially even those watchdog groups that, would be out to criticize your efforts. If instead you actually went about working with those watchdog groups to form an agenda, that only helps you mitigate risk when pursuing your strategy or pursuing your sustainability agenda. And then in terms of the what of sustainability, there's really no one size fits all solution. And it's really important to weigh the different sources of impact and timelines when evaluating options. So the most important thing, no matter what technology you decide to pursue, is that it's really important to be transparent and communicate how solutions will fit into the bigger picture of sustainability, your sustainability roadmap, no matter how big or small. Because even if they're small changes, consumers are becoming more aware that sustainability is a difficult thing to grapple, and that it's not going to be one disruptive solution that's going to make things better, that it is going to be an aggregate of these smaller solutions. And I think it really does help, it helps make your company appear more legitimate when you are transparent and open about the challenges of sustainability as well. So from what we know, us as analysts, after researching this topic day in and day out, is that the road to sustainability is long, it's seemingly endless, and it's nearly impossible not to stumble from time to time, but it's still one that's worthwhile to participate in because, well, we all want to look like this runner at the end of the day. We want our businesses to be strong and be able to endure whatever challenges come our way. So for a company like Nike, the choice to pursue sustainability 30 years ago was really not an option. And not only has the company been able to reestablish its reputation since, it has had a nearly unbroken run of increased growth profits ever since 2009, largely in part because of its efforts around corporate responsibility, which the company still continues to improve upon to this day. So with that, we will be taking questions that you may have from today's discussion, which you can also type into the question box. If we do not get time to answer your question on this call, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. Great. So Samitha, the first question we have today, it's around kind of this chicken and egg dilemma with sustainability regarding whether the burden of responsibility for tackling sustainability should be on brands or their suppliers. So in your opinion, whose responsibility is it?
I think that the responsibility falls to brand owners, and there's a couple different reasons for that. But probably the most important to the brand owner is that consumers don't know the names of brand owners' supply chain partners. It's very unlikely that you're going to walk up to a person in the street and say, "Do you recognize PepsiCo or do you recognize, I don't know, Tetra Pak?" It's just, it's just not recognized. The layperson is not aware. So from the consumer's point of view, they're going to blame whichever name they know. And that's usually going to be the PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Nestle's of the world. I think, unfortunately, for the brands, that's a responsibility that they have to bear.
Okay, so as a follow-up question to that, I've seen a lot of brands shrug sustainability commitments, saying that it's really out of their control and that they don't have the leverage to incite change with their suppliers. So what recommendations or best practices do you have for brands making these arguments?
Yeah, I mean, so look, historically, in consumer-facing industries, the brand owner is demanding various things on behalf of the consumers to their supply chain. If they, request brighter packaging, or if they request packaging that is more round and less square because that tested better with their consumers, these are demands that brand owners would put on their packaging providers, or all the people in their supply chain, and then those players would in turn research and develop those materials or those packaging designs in order to satisfy their client, the downstream brand owner. So it's a little bit insincere to turn that around and say that we don't have any influence on the suppliers, because that's how the industry has worked, and also brand owners have the highest enjoy the nicest margins in the entire supply chain as well. Now, that's not to say that brand owners should be doing everything themselves. They can't. They don't have the capacity to do that, and there's a reason they have upstream suppliers and partners for everything that goes into their business. But what should be happening, I think, is much more of a collaborative approach, where brand owners partner with their suppliers. And by partner, I mean not just lay out a list of demands for what more sustainable packaging, for example, should look like, but to actually, put some money on the table and say, we're going to help fund some of this development, maybe help fund the scale up of this technology that ultimately, if adopted across multiple brands, can really make a difference in the overall sustainability of a particular segment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that brings us back to one of our key points, which was collaboration, the importance of external collaboration, and, not just collaboration between, brands and their suppliers, but, brands with other brands to
Absolutely.
push the needle with their suppliers. And also, it's possible there are different types of consortia out there that, brands could get involved in, or getting involved in things like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that have different stakeholders along the value chain, so that everybody can work together in trying to come up with these solutions, because at the end of the day, sustainability is something that's really difficult, if not impossible, to tackle on your own.
Yeah.
Great. And so I think the last question for today, and something that's a little bit more timely, is from Danon CEO and its recent ousting. So over the past 7 years, Emmanuel Faber, who was the CEO of Danon, he was one of the leading executives, I would say, for promoting stakeholder capitalism and centering the core business units around ESG, or environmental social governance objectives. So the company was one of 10 that received a AAA score from the Carbon Disclosure Project, or it's actually referred to as CDP today, in 2020. But where did it go wrong? If it's been pursuing sustainability, but the CEO was recently ousted for the company's poor performance.
I think one of the challenges, and I think you pointed this out early on, is that in pursuing sustainability, you can never do it in a vacuum, right? That can never be the only goal. There are so many other stakeholders to consider. And as the CEO, one of your most important set of stakeholders is your investors, your shareholders. And I think a little bit of what went wrong there isn't that he spent too much time on or effort or resources on sustainability, because I think they moved the needle in a lot of different ways, like sustainable agriculture, for example. There's so many great things that Danone has been doing there. I think what happened is that because there was so much emphasis on the sustainability side of Danone's story the last 7 years, the focus on the core business diminished, and he wasn't able to achieve that balance and satisfy the stakeholders who are ultimately driven by short-term capitalism in favor of long-term safety for the planet, which is of course a noble goal, but it doesn't make you money from quarter to quarter. It's more of a long-term thing. So I think there's so much good that came out of many of the initiatives that they ran, but it's just you need to balance. It's a balancing act.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Thank you, Smitha, so much for joining today, for assisting me on this webinar. So that concludes our webinar for today. The slide presentation and recording from this webinar will be sent to all attendees via email. After leaving the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation. We would appreciate any feedback you may have to help inform and improve future webinars. Thanks for joining and have a great day.